This training video is going to show the interaction of units when they're in close proximity to each other, in case where we're going to be situations where they might impede or actually interpenetrate amongst each other and would cause the effects of morale disorder on the respective both units. And this would apply only when you're talking with formed close order units. Skirmishers and units like artillery do not impede the movement of close order units. The only thing is, at the end of your final measurement of movement, you cannot occupy with an open order screen and a formed unit exactly the same location on the tabletop. Now I'm going to go through various areas of this simulated battle situation to reflect where you can change formation, and where if you did change formation it might be a case where you put the unit into morale disorder due to the interpenetration of units. So let's start with some of the more simpler examples. We have this French Léger battalion in the foreground here, and I'm going to change it out into line. And remember, you do all your facing and formation changes before you do movements of units. So if I want to put this unit out into line, I can just easily place it over here, for instance. No impediment, perfectly fine, no issues here at all. I could also, if I wanted to, extend it in the same location of where this gun is, because you're allowed to march through a battery of artillery, either if it's limbered or unlimbered, or an open order screen. You just can't end your movement phase occupying the same location. And there was an exception to this, of course, if you put the guns into an actual square. But I'll cover that later. So if I put it on the other side, i.e. out here in line, and that means the infantry basically extended out into line in front of the guns, and then in their upcoming movement phase they would move away. I could not remain in this position at the conclusion of the movement phase. Now let's look at the example of this English cavalry out here. Let's say they wanted to extend into a 2 wide column and 3 deep. Well, obviously you cannot go past your forward edge of your unit, so there's no way to deploy this way. And in fact they would have to deploy back here. But if they did, they would be occupying the same space as this formal unit, or closed order unit, and the cavalry. So if I elected to do that, I would automatically have to disorder the cavalry and the infantry, and then during my movement move the English cavalry away so it's not occupying the same space. But the penalty of interpenetrating the units caused a morale disorder for both these units. So normally a player would not elect to do that, because there's nothing worse than being in a morale disorder state when you're in close proximity to the enemy. You're already halfway home to routing off the table. Now movement through skirmishers is not an issue. If you were to extend or change formation into where presently a skirmisher formation is, again, no issue. So let's look at this Austrian battalion here. If they wanted to form line, but form line off the front edge of this battalion, off to the left side, it would occupy the same space as this English cavalry. Therefore, it would morale disorder both units. The formation can be done, but you've now morale disordered both units. And at the end of the movement phase, you cannot be remaining in exactly the same location of the units. So one of these units would have to move. But it could extend out this way, because it has an open field of ground. So I could change this unit's formation out to a line going out this way. And that is valid. Now let's look at this Austrian line battalion, which is already in line. If it wanted to change into a column formation and come back in this area where this English battalion is presently residing, it would, if it did, then both battalions would become morale disorder. They're both interpenetrated. But it could, if it wished, form its column off of this end of the line, for example. It has the room to do it, and therefore it's perfectly valid in the game. This English battalion, if you wanted to extend into the line going this way, and this column started where it was, it would so do it. It would have to put the figures theoretically here temporarily, morale disorder both units for interpenetration, and then at the end of the movement phase, one or both of them would have to move to actually clear the zone, so they're not occupying the same space. But it could form a line out here with no problem. As such. Key thing in mind, very crucial, is that the facing and formation phases has to be completed especially when you have units very close to each other and in dense formation, that it could be situations where you cannot actually change the unit to the desired formations that you wish. Now, the key thing is, when you do formation changes, remember it's off the forward edge, or the frontal facing of the unit. If this battalion of English was actually up here, and in line with this front edge of this battalion, normally you would say, well, you can only extend out here, and you probably, with all these figures, would go into the English cavalry. And obviously you can't go this way because the English line presently reside there, so if it did, it would morale disorder both units. But there's a little tactical idea. Turn the unit around with a facing change, as such, and then change into the formation that you just so desired, in this case a line, and such. Put it out like this. This is valid. So quite common you might see a situation where a player would turn a unit around and then do the formation change, because he has some room in the back area. Conversely, you could do this tactic. You had your column here originally. Change it around to what it was originally here. And flip the last few figures around. What it could do is face this way. So it would be a 6-figure frontage, roughly, like so. And then you would have your back figures here. As you can see, it so fits at the end of the facing portion, and then go into line. So done, and then it can march forward in this direction during the actual movement phase, assuming that these units have already moved beforehand. And that brings up the next point. When it comes to movement, there is a sequence of movements. If there's a unit in front of you, you have to move the unit in front first to its final residing place before you come to the next unit. You cannot march this unit through this unit and then move this unit. It has to be this unit, or in this case the English cavalry, which is in front of this Austrian battalion, would move first, clear the way, so that there's a clear, unimpeded path for the infantry to march along. Same thing here. If it was a case of which of these battalions move first, you might have to make a determination. If this French battalion wanted to move past this English cavalry, the English cavalry has to be gotten out of the way in the actual movement segment before you would march the infantry forward. So there is a crucial sequencing of how you move the units. And in most cases, it's quite common and it's quite simple to figure out a way for the units to do it individually, and so everybody clears. But if the units are dense, or it's tight, or you're in close proximity to the enemy, then close attention needs to be paid by both players as to how the units actually moved or marched past each other in that tight area. One last thing, remember, artillery is like skirmishers. It's sort of like an open order formation. And that's mainly because the guns and everybody can march around pretty freely. They can go independently to each other and get through the gaps and things of that nature which would be between the formed units. So if you have an artillery battery and you wanted to march it through, let's say it started over here, and you wanted to march it through a line battalion and then deploy it, that's perfectly fine, because we treat artillery just like infantry, which is in open order, or cavalry, which is in open order. If this cavalry, or this English cavalry, was all in open order, or was declared to be going into open order formation, you can physically pick up the figure and go right through a formed unit and deploy him someplace else. Because open order formations can freely march through, or weave their way through the gaps, shall we say, of formed units. But formed units, it's very hard to weave a gap through a gap unless the gap is as wide as your present unit.